Live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Walton. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Good morning, everybody. How are you? It is Friday, August 21st. You're ready to start another day. I actually started all of my prelude music at, prelude, I should say, music at 8:20 on the dot. So one of the rare times where I didn't actually have to try and fade out my music by hand. And I noticed it doesn't, I do a better job fading it out by hand, in fact, I think, than is actually on recording. Hey, well, you probably never noticed that. I think we switch over when we're in the middle of the interlude, as we like to call it, behind the scenes. Anyway, it's a bit of an odd morning here, and we'll try and get used to it. Plenty to wade through, and so far so good with Skype. Fingers crossed, no crashes so far, unless it was waiting until after airtime to start crashing. I've got a nice lineup of stories all ready and waiting from Greg, so we'll be speaking with him in a few minutes, as usual. And a huge bank of stories in Pocket. Oh, you know what it is? I realized I have not had Firefox open all this time. So now that we're opening Firefox, this will be a great live on-the-air experiment to see if it crashes Skype. Hope not, but if it does, we'll keep Skype open and go to Pocket on the iPad. As many screens as I could possibly have going at once, I think, is probably the prescription here. But lots of great stories, things that I think make good Friday stories, things that are long, in-depth, maybe a little bit off the breaking news beaten path, something you can talk about over the weekend with people who have invited you over because they don't know how nerdy you really are and thought you would make for good conversation around the barbecue grill or around the pool, or for that matter, over cocktails if you're that kind of person. Plenty of good stuff, and thanks to Bill in Portland, Maine for starting us off with our regular morning tweet. Daily Coast Radio is live now, you know this. PolitiFact rates the claim by Kagro X, me, David Waldman, that it's Friday as mostly true. And that's the way they'd have to go with it. What if there's a podcast? What if this is being replayed on a Thursday, or however? Which direction did days shift in next year's calendar? Will August 21st be a Thursday next year or a Saturday? I forget which way they shift. It probably doesn't matter, and it's not worth worrying about until it's time for me to post it as a rerun. And at that point, there won't be much we can do. And hopefully, if I'm posting this as a rerun next year, it's because I'm on vacation in some way. Missed out a lot on vacation this summer. No extended beach vacation for me. The kids, though, are having their time at the beach, which has made for a weird week around here, but a lot less background noise, so that's good. Let's see, where can we catch up with today's fantastic news stories? Well, let's see. I put out, we pushed another gun fail compilation out the door yesterday. Not the most exciting one. It's a good thing when it's not terribly exciting and there's a lower number of accidents, but in compiling what will be the forthcoming next week's piece that will come out hopefully toward the front end of next week instead of the back end like this week. Here's an interesting one. We keep running into this problem with cops not being entirely sure or well equipped when it comes to dealing with aggressive dogs. This is a lower priority, I think, than training police on how to deal with people. We're still working on that one. But dogs seem to repeatedly pose huge problems for police. And police generally seem to regard aggressive dogs, and really not even all that aggressive dogs, and sometimes not aggressive at all, according to the reports afterwards. But they seem to regard dogs as free targets, moving, living, breathing meat targets that will die if you shoot them, and so therefore kind of cool because it has that whole mysterious air of being able to remotely put something to death to it. But it's not a human, so you're probably not going to get in a great deal of trouble. They love shooting dogs. I really don't know what it is, but I think they just don't have any tools for it. This one is the latest in a series of stories that I find in my gun fail compilation, because people have screwed up and shot people. But this one is just, I don't know, this one's really weird and outstanding in a way, mostly because of how much they tried to not, I guess, shoot the dog, and then they ended up shooting the dog. This is from Kenosha, Wisconsin, and I believe this happened on Wednesday. I'll read a little bit from this. A woman is recovering from a gunshot wound after police accidentally shot her in the foot while trying to stop a dog from attacking her. You want to stop dogs from attacking people, that's true. WITI reports an English bulldog was loose. I didn't think that they were this aggressive, but okay, this one was. And was attacking people yesterday, that is Wednesday, in Kenosha. The owner says his bulldog and chihuahua, by the way, got loose after landscapers left their gate open. The bulldog, I guess, hates people and not chihuahuas. It wasn't that he just wanted to bite something, because he could have bit the chihuahua. The bulldog began attacking people, and it wouldn't let go of a neighbor's thigh, which, coincidentally, Ashley Madison, also many people there won't let go of their neighbor's thighs. I just want to work that into the news. But this was with his teeth, and I don't know if they're into that on Ashley Madison or not. I guess you can sign up special if that's something you want to do. Officers accident. Now, this is the key element here. And of course, in the plain news speak, it's like, okay, that sounds weird. Officers accidentally both tased and shot the woman while attempting to hit the dog. Now, in total, 3 people were bitten by the dog. The woman who was shot is in the hospital. Since police fired their weapons, the sheriff's office is investigating. Thank you. I mean, I know that's the bottom rung there, but how about, I know that would include shooting a woman in the foot would also count as firing the weapon, so there would be an investigation. But, you could just say that. The dog ultimately was shot and killed, sadly. But this is the part that struck me about this, that she was both tased and shot while they're trying to hit the dog. So I'm imagining, I mean, it's not funny if someone's been shot, but I'm imagining this Keystone Cop scene where, I don't worry, ma'am, I'll save you. I'll tase the dog and, fire the taser prongs, and the woman says, you got me, you tased me, what are you doing, you idiot, stop it, just get this dog off of me. Don't worry, ma'am, I tried to tase the dog and I missed slightly, I hit you, but don't worry, I've got a new plan. I'm going to shoot the dog with the gun. No, just, you know what, let the dog feed, whatever, the idea, you have someone else. Is there a marksman who could do this? Because, of course, the next thing that happens is he shoots and he hits the woman. Hold on, ma'am, I am sorry I hit you there, but I do have a nuclear weapon in the truck. Hang on, I'll get this dog for you. I'll hit it with a baseball bat. Wow. I don't know. I just can't believe that this goes on. And it's one of dozens of stories that I've got, sometimes that make the gun fail compilations, sometimes not, but just it's unbelievable how often police try to shoot dogs. They ring people's doorbells or knock on their doors either to serve a warrant or ask questions or do a welfare check, and the door opens and somebody's dog runs out. Has anybody ever have that problem where they open the door and their dog goes out the door? It's really weird. And cops go crazy, and they are shooting, golden retrievers and Labradors and Chihuahuas, thinking, I thought it was a pit bull. A very small but extremely hairy and yappy pit bull. I don't know. It's a weird thing that goes on. It's neither here nor there, and there's plenty worse gun stories, I assure you. I just find this one rather amazing, and I really think that there's an issue here that they don't. Maybe they need to come up with an invention. Some clever person needs to come up with something. Cattle prod sticks. Why don't they have those? I don't understand why you need to shoot a dog remotely with a taser either. But this keeps happening, and cops clearly have no tools for dealing with it. But like I said, priority-wise, they also so far don't have any tools for actually dealing with people in their neighborhoods either. They keep shooting them too. So I don't know. And giving them less lethal things tends to manifests itself in cops saying, well, I'll just use the one that hurts the guy that I don't have to write any paperwork about, pepper spray. So that hasn't really solved anything either. I don't know. Nationwide, they're clearly all cops. We need to sit down. I'll bring donuts. It'll be cool. You'll like it, and we'll talk. Anyway, Greg Dworkin is here, though I do not have donuts. And besides which, it's bagels at your meetings usually, right?
Absolutely. You know, and let me give you a quick box planner, which will just set everything straight. Okay. If your only tool is a hammer, the world is a nail.
Yes,
I mean, that's all you need to know about the relationship between, trying to restrain an animal, or an aggressive cat or a particularly nasty ferret, or rabbits in a bad mood. Apologies, Artless Bunny. Like that never happens, but still, if that's the only tool you have, you're going to wind up using it. And if you use it, bad things sometimes happen.
I guess that's true, and it really doesn't change things to say, well, I'll tell you what, I'll give you a claw hammer and a ball peen hammer, and I'll see how you do.
Yeah, still a hammer. Anyway, I had this really cool, incredibly insightful and informative story to tell you here. I have it lined up. It's Donald Trump poll. Donald Trump leads in GOP field. A new poll shows Trump leading Huckabee, Romney, Gingrich, Palin. It's from April 2011, and it's about the 2012 election here. But it's from the Daily News, and it just it kind of puts things in perspective here. The Donald is trumping his GOP competitors. The billionaire real estate mogul has taken a rather shocking 9-point lead in a national poll of the hypothetical Republican presidential field. For some reason, people weren't freaking out about this 4 years ago.
Oh.
This is a public policy polling piece. That's where the poll is. Trump leads with 26%. Does that sound familiar?
Yes.
Followed by former Arkansas Governor Mike Huckabee at 17, former Massachusetts Governor Mitt Romney at 15, and ex-Speaker of the House Newt Gingrich at 11. Now, why wasn't that described as a strong field, even though it wasn't? Because this year is described as a strong field, even though it isn't.
Yeah. I don't know. That's a good question.
I mean, you had former governors, you had ex-Speaker of the House. I mean, that's pretty impressive. And, of course, you have Donald Trump, who's beaten them all.
Yeah. That does, well, I don't know. Maybe because we are terrible people.
Rounding out the bottom of the list were former Alaska Governor Sarah Palin at 8, Texas Republican Ron Paul at 5, Minnesota Republican Michelle Bachmann, that's one L for Michelle and two N's for Bachmann, 4, and former Minnesota Governor Tim Pawlenty, remember him, at 4.
I do. That's a very similar field in thinking about it. I mean, Pawlenty I just swapped for Walker.
Right, exactly.
Boring. And Ron Paul just gets swapped for Rand Paul.
That's easy.
The percentage is the same.
Yeah.
And I don't know. The other stuff, it all seems pretty much similar too. Michelle Bachmann's gone. No.
Yeah, Trump, whose potential candidacy has for weeks had many pundits snickering, does it sound familiar? Has written his loud but debunked concern that President Obama wasn't born in America to the top of the GOP heap. People forget that Trump had a practice run in 2011, doing all the same things he's doing now.
Like Mitt Romney. He didn't, and then he won.
Mm-hmm. Oh. Some people believe that Trump fares so well simply because he enjoys much better name recognition than the other candidates. I mean, it's nice when you can pull out your old stories and just, like, cross out the date in crayon, and then just republish it.
We talked about that. They do love that.
Mm-hmm.
Haven't really
So I thought I'd go find an example, and this is it.
I feel like, I don't know, it feels like they were writing them like they discovered it anew somehow, as opposed to saying, hey, we already why would they resist the chance to say, we told you that this could work, or that this would happen, or, I don't know, they forgot, or...
Short memories. Public policy pollster Tom Jensen doubts Trump will really make a go at the presidency. But if he doesn't, someone who taps into the same sort of hard right sentiment he's appealing to right now will get their votes. It's hard to imagine these folks voting for a more centrist candidate like Romney or Pawlenty. That's exactly the same thing that Matthew Dowd told me. That if they don't vote for Trump, they are not turning around and voting for Jeb or some senator.
And yet, kind of did, and I mean, not happy about it, but
No, not the Trump voters. The Trump voters didn't. Remember, they coalesced behind Santorum.
Well, yeah, I mean,
In the end, they all consolidate. They all collect.
That's what I mean. In the general, it's not that they didn't stay home. Although I guess they didn't turn out in big numbers either because he lost. But
you don't know who didn't show. I mean, that's really the point here. And besides, he was really referring to the primary part of it, not necessarily the general. They're still not going to vote for the black guy, these guys.
Yeah. Well, it is pretty interesting to look back at things like this. Must be why I use reruns so often.
Right,
I like
exactly.
to look back and see that nothing has changed.
I think sometimes columnists do that, but I think that the news organization should do that on the front page. It's summer. Here's a story from 2012. It's like the same thing. Have at it.
It could be interesting. I mean, every once in a while they do it. Local papers do it.
Nobody would notice. That's the thing.
It'd
be even better to not say that that's what you're doing.
That would be fun. Also, I don't know. They get away with it on April Fool's Day, so pulling tricks like that. So why not? 1st of August, just rerun something from the year before or 4 years ago.
Here's something that is new. That's at least got a byline. I don't know if Robert Costa and Philip Rucker wrote this years ago, but it says, inside the GOP fields, new strategies to ride out the Trump tornado. It's not incredibly insightful here. I mean, basically, some people are ignoring him. Here it is. Non-Trump candidates are falling into 3 categories. Those who are emulating and befriending him in an effort to win over his supporters, like Ted Cruz.
That's right.
And sort of Jeb Bush, like anchor baby stuff, which is incredibly offensive, and I can't believe he said it, but he did, but that's because he's a terrible candidate. Okay. Those who are sailing his background are calling him out for his views and rhetoric. That would be George Pataki, who you don't even hear of anymore. Right. And those who prefer to stay silent, as if hunkering down in the basement to ride out the tornado.
That's some kind of attribute for a presidential candidate. Silence.
Right. No one has figured out how to handle Trump, said former New Jersey Governor Thomas H. Keene Sr.
Yes.
That's a Republican. Everybody underestimated him terribly from day one, but as somebody who knows him and knew his father, the whole family, I can assure you that was a mistake. Jeb Bush's latest tech illustrates the tension. He launched a tough verbal assault against Trump this week in New Hampshire, saying he's not a proven conservative and taking through his past liberal positions. In fact, he called him a Democrat, a tax-raising Democrat at that. Yet Bush's allied super PAC vowed not to spend money to supplement the candidate's barbs. If other campaigns wish we're going to uncork money on Donald Trump, they'll be disappointed, said Mike Murphy, chief strategist of the Right to Rise PAC, who's not allowed to talk to Bush about this sort of thing. Right. Trump is frankly other people's problem. We'd be happy to have a two-way race with Trump in the end, and we have every confidence Governor Bush would beat him. And that's probably true. On the other hand, less funded candidates want Bush to spend all his money on it.
Yeah,
Murphy said, no, we're going to tell the Jeb story. In other words, Murphy's going to go positive before he goes negative. If you know Mike Murphy, you know he's going negative. The only question is when. And I have a feeling they're going to move up the negative sooner because Jeb is just doing so badly.
Yeah. All right. Well, we'll keep an eye on that and wait and see. Interesting to hear from Tom Kean on that. I never say senior because Tom Kean Jr. is nothing.
Right. Former Texas Governor Rick Perry was one of the first candidates to aggressively take on Trump. Probably going to be one of the first to drop out, too. Yeah. And one reason groups are reluctant to launch an ad war against Trump is research to convince some he's not an ominous threat to the GOP brand. A focus group of Hispanic voters in Denver, conducted by a conservative organization, which requested anonymity because of client agreements. Several voters said they see Trump as an entertainment figure more so than a representative of the Republican Party. That could change, however, as Trump's campaign continues and some candidates move to embrace his positions. I love this. They are fooling themselves. Please keep doing this.
All right.
There's no evidence that it's really hurting them. Yeah, well, when Jeb Bush talks about anchor babies, you think that just came out of nowhere, folks? And that's not going to hurt. That's an incredible insult.
Especially for, one of two candidates who's supposed to be somewhat more sensitive to the nuance of the immigration situation. Mm-hmm. And that's not going to help. And probably his wife did not like that.
Right. Romney hasn't said anything. He's one of the people that's sitting on the sidelines hunkering down. And, they give the example of Bush using the anchor baby thing. And it was funny because on Twitter, Bush says anchor babies. You don't like the word? Do you have a better term? Bush snapped at a reporter in Keene, that would be New Hampshire. And Hillary tweeted, "Try babies."
Yeah, they don't have
American
difficulty.
Citizens. Try. There's a couple of other things you could use. And so you have that. Let's see. You have. Christie and Kasich avoiding clashes with a man they consider his friend.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
Rubio ignoring it. Rand Paul going after Trump with a machete. I mean, all sorts of different sorts of things. None of them are working, really. Trump, I am still convinced he's got his 25%, just like he had his 25% in 2011, and that's all he's got. And really, the reason that the rest of the GOP field hasn't figured out what to do is because the answer is so obvious that they just are afraid of it. Half of them have to drop out.
Yeah. Well, that's
that takes care of the problem. It's very simple. It's just that they don't want to be the ones.
Right.
That's why they won't talk about it.
No one wants to take one for the team.
If you ask them privately, they'll say, all these other guys have to drop out, then it's just me and him, and I win.
Right.
Right? But they all say that.
Yeah, that's the problem.
That's the problem. Exactly. So, really kind of weird. Polling stuff, well, I guess the most interesting poll yesterday was the MU Law poll out of Wisconsin, which I happen to love because it's by Charles Franklin, one of the great pollsters. And he's done a really good job in following the whole Scott Walker saga from the beginning. And, Walker was pretty much maintaining his popularity up until recently, and now he's kind of dropping the way that Chris Christie is dropping in New Jersey. A new Marquette Law School poll finds Scott Walker leading in Wisconsin with 25% of voters following Walker are Ben Carson at 13%. Remember, Carson picks up a lot of the people who are uncomfortable with Trump but like outsider candidates. He won't last, and so the question is, where does his votes go? Donald Trump at 9%, Ted Cruz at 8%, Fiorina and Rubio at 7%, Jeb Bush at 6%. I'm telling you, folks, Bush is a terrible candidate, even if he's the eventual winner.
Yeah, he's pretty bad.
And each of the remaining candidates gets 4%. In April, the Marquette poll had Walker at 40% with Rand Paul in second at 10%. Trump wasn't included. On the Democratic side, Hillary is 44%, Bernie 32%, Biden at 12%. I suspect most of Biden's voters will go to Hillary. Link Chafee, Martin O'Malley, Jim Webb each received less than 1%. And this contrasts, the 44 contrasts in April when Clinton hit 58, although it's kind of tough to compare now to April. It's a completely different environment now. And also, Elizabeth Warren had 14% in April. She's not in the poll now. Interestingly, in the 2016 race for Senate, Feingold 47 and Ron Johnson 42, which is down from 54-38. These things tend to tighten over time. Feingold is viewed favorably by 42, unfavorably by 30, and Johnson is seen favorably by 30 and unfavorably by 31. So that's not necessarily great for Johnson, considering that he's like an incumbent and all that.
Yeah.
And then here's the part that I thought was also interesting: Clinton 47, Bush 42, Clinton 52, Walker 42. She runs better against Bush than Walker in his own state. Clinton 50, Cruz 38, Clinton 51, Trump 35. The fascinating thing about this is that this is a really good poll by a really good pollster. And it's really hard to believe the Republican-leaning Quinnipiac poll the other day and this, because they can't both be at the same time. Clinton can't be basically tied with Bush in Pennsylvania, but whomping him in Wisconsin. It just doesn't make any sense. And the best explanation is, well, the Q poll's wrong, as it often is.
Oh, well, that could be too.
So that's easy.
Yes.
Anyway, a good solid poll. Again, everything is tightening compared to what it was 6 months ago. So what? Big news. And at the same time, the idea that Hillary is in free fall that some people like to throw out there just isn't true. Here's another one that kind of makes that point. I like it because it's one of my favorite poli-sci guys. It's Matthew Dickinson from Middlebury, the guy that's been following the Bernie story. This time he's posting in U.S. News and World Report, as it used to be called, "No trust issues. Don't believe those who say Hillary Clinton can't win because voters find her untrustworthy." And to skip all of his summing up of the data, the bottom line, it may be that Hillary just isn't a very good candidate, but it's more likely that some pundits just aren't very good political analysts.
Oh, well, there is always that.
Yeah. Anyway, he just points out there's simply no data supporting the idea that if your unfavorables are high, that you just don't win.
Oh.
And he uses one of my favorite examples, of course, which is the nationwide survey of voters that's found 41% of those polled Clinton honest and trustworthy. 54% did not. Among those who didn't find Clinton trustworthy, 67% are voting for Clinton's opponent. And if you don't fundamentally trust somebody or believe they are at least honest, how would you justify putting the controls in the country in their hands, at least for 4 years? Problem is, all of that comes in 1996, and it was about Bill, and of course he won.
Yeah.
I've said that before, and I think it's important for people to understand that data is just very weak in saying that your judgment of a person actually affects how you vote. The tribal pull is far more powerful.
Yes. So Trump wins.
So Trump wins until he doesn't. And in other words, Trump stays at 25 until 25 is no longer a winning number.
All right. Until they find someone more boring.
I can't emphasize that enough. It's not that Trump's people will fade. They've always liked him. They're always, 25% of the party's going to be Archie Bunker types. That's not going to change. Mm-hmm. What does change is whether 25 is a winning number or not. That's going to change radically.
Okay. Well, I'm waiting, and so far it feels like, 6-7 days I've waited already. What's happening?
Yeah, I don't know. Anyway.
Does this have to take longer? You didn't say.
I don't know. This piece by Matthew Dickinson also is got some fun digs in here. Despite these findings, this won't stop pundits from incorrectly insisting that, quote, candidates matter in close campaigns. That goes double for a presidential race, which tends to be more dependent on personality and likability than on any sort of policy prescriptions. Italics added. That is a quote, of course, from The Fix, and that is a quote that is completely wrong, which is why he quotes it here. It's just wrong. The poli-sci people will tell you, look, what matters is presidential approval rating for the guy who's in the White House now and the state of the economy. And it's got nothing to do with your idea of who is a good guy to have a beer with. And they've said it 1,000 times. The data supports them. The pundits ignore it and talk about all this other stuff that really has nothing to do with anything.
Well, the key thing usually is coming up with a new cool name for a demographic that you consider to be the make or break demo.
Right, whether it's soccer moms or security dads or whatever it is you want to.
What will we have this time? And if Trump is still driving things when it comes time to figure out what that demographic is, I am curious what that's going to be. Right.
Hey, let's talk about stuff that isn't necessarily horse race. And I do have one think piece for you, although it's a depressing one. But here's before we get to that, Josh Marshall, breaking nuclear stuff is really complicated.
Breaking nuclear stuff?
Yeah. The thing is, it's all about that AP story that got everything completely and totally wrong about the nuclear deal. The one that claimed that the Iranians were going to be inspecting themselves.
Oh, yes. Okay.
Which is completely, totally false. As it turns out, it really looks like somebody leaked in as damaging a way possible a story to the AP, which just stenographed it and stenoed it and ran with it, and it turned out to be completely untrue. As it turns out, the reference wasn't at all to any of the nuclear sites; it was to a military site, and as it also happens, the IAEA would accompany Iran to do this, which also means that they get access to stuff that they never had before. So rather than understanding that actually this is good because it has nothing to do with the actual nuclear stuff and we get access to stuff we never had before, they write it up as Iran gets to inspect themselves. It's incredibly bad reporting. And, part of the deal, as Josh Marshall says, is, look, this nuclear stuff is complicated. Einstein said that. It doesn't necessarily work in the way your everyday life experience would suggest, so it's important to consult the people who know about the nuclear stuff. People called scientists, particularly nuclear scientists. And here we have another case where Tendentious malefactors leak seemingly damning details to reporters who, in the most basic sense, do not know what they are talking about, and write a story which can and often does dramatically affect the public debate over a critical issue. It happened with the 24 days nonsense. Oh, they have 24 days before we have to be there. You can't get rid of radiation with a half-life of thousands to millions of years in 24 days. How do I know that? Because the nuclear scientists tell us so.
That's, even with soap?
Even with soap. And it may, even with OxyClean. So,
wow.
So you have to. So the AP has to scrub its story, Josh Marshall writes, and pull the New York Times pretending the gist somehow isn't changed when there's barely a story there in the first place. And it's a replay of how reporters, often acting in good faith, get played by malicious leaks. There are lots of reporters, unfortunately, who are in on the scam, but they shall remain nameless. And it's all a replay of the tragic nonsense parade which preceded the Iraq War, with lots of the same easy mark reporters.
Dang.
Again, basic premise. The nuclear stuff is complicated. The nuclear scientists understand it better than Hannity or Wolf Blitzer. Listen to the nuclear scientists, who all line up in support of this agreement, which, by the way, is going to pass.
Yeah. My guess is that most of the people who understand nuclear stuff also will not even ask for anonymity in the story, so they make a better source.
In fact, maybe they might, get on board and say 75 of us all agree, It's kind of like that global warming thing,
That's okay.
Let's get both views because there's the 99% and there's the 1%.
Yes. Well, okay. I think there's a way out of that whole situation. I think most people, even your average layperson, probably still remembers enough something from science or science fiction or whatever that radiation doesn't disappear very quickly. Right. That's one of the things that makes, Mad Max and the Terminator really scary, and all the cool movies where you have to worry about radiation for a long, long time, that kind of thing. Oh, yeah. That's a good point. So maybe they just need the post-apocalyptic movies to be run on HBO and I guess perhaps some non-premium cable, too, would help. That'll probably clear things up for everybody. 24 hours or 24 days or 24 weeks, 24 years really won't even do it.
Right. Anyway, 3 pieces to leave you with, and you can decide whether you want to talk about them or just put them away.
Okay.
First, from the L.A. Times, speaking of radiation, this reminds me of Jimmy Carter. Jimmy Carter has one very big regret. Most presidents are right there with him. It's a story about how each president has made a big mistake they would like to, go back and do differently. Carter's, of course, is he wanted to send one more helicopter. He said, if I could do it again, I would have sent one more helicopter. I would have rescued the hostages that would have been reelected. Oh, well. That's my... But, he's got brain cancer. He's got a radiation settled in terms of how he's going to approach this, and he has no regrets. He's, I think, in our lifetime, the best ex-president we ever had. He's a really, truly decent guy and helps to put somebody like Donald Trump in complete and total perspective.
Yes, or Debbie Schlussel, who is that weirdo, vile, right-wing commentator of some kind. What makes her famous, I'm not sure, but every time something horrible is said, her name seems to be on it. Yeah, she was, I think her reaction to the news that Carter had announced that he was suffering from cancer was that, as she put it, a cancer has cancer. A fantastic person.
Lovely.
I'm going to wish some death, actually, I think, right there.
Right, but, what we really need is a truly humanitarian human being like Donald Trump dominating things because he speaks for the Republican Party.
Habitat for Humanity, just a side gig for him, whatever. He just happened to spend his time doing that.
People forget about the work he did with settling things between Egypt and Israel.
Yes.
And it may not have settled all things in the Middle East, but it certainly, toned down the issue of an actual, shooting war.
Yes.
For, some 20 years. So that was kind of important.
Yeah. What do the hardcore right-wing I love Israel folks make of the fact that they deconflicted the entirety of Israel's western border?
We'll have to wait because
What a
they're too
scumbag,
busy.
huh?
They're too busy spitting at him to actually sit down and write their thoughts. So,
Right.
so we'll see. But that is absolutely worth mentioning, and I don't want to let this week go by without saying something about that. Another piece from this one is from the Washington Post. Global warming worsened the California drought, scientists say. What do scientists know? And this last think piece, which is the depressing one, as if the global warming one isn't depressing, is Democratic Blues. Barack Obama will leave his party in its worst shape since the Great Depression, even if Hillary wins, by Jeff Greenfield, talking about how Democrats really are hurting at the state level, Congress and the House in particular. They may take the Senate back. They certainly may keep the White House, but at the state level they have a whole lot of work to do. So I think that's
arguable. Yeah.
That is worth thinking about. So that's my segment for this morning. And I thank you so much for having me here all week so I can pontificate and yell at you and interrupt you, which is what we New Yorkers do when our friends are talking to us. That's how we prove listening to them. This is Greg Dworkin speaking to my friend Kagro in the morning. And thanks so much for the Netroots Radio folks for making it happen. And if you're listening to us by download, podcast, however you do it, thanks for the WEAC Radio folks in the Washington catchment area for putting us on the air. And we'll come back next week and we'll do some more stuff, I think.
I think so. You probably shouldn't, but
depends on Skype.
Okay, yeah, we'll leave it up to the good people at Skype, who I guess were working hard on all of those reports that I clicked their way the balance of the week.
All righty, take care.
Thanks, you too, Greg. Have a great weekend. I will update our discussion of police shootings and dogs by letting you know that Bill in Portland, Maine had this tidbit of information on hand. For some reason. He says cops can easily distract and pacify a dog, even an aggressive dog, I guess, by giving it a dehydrated bull penis. They love them, not kidding. And a follow-up, a bull penis is also known as bully sticks. I would think that they would probably have to have a marketing name for that one. What should we do with these dehydrated bull penises? Dogs love them, but we're having a hard time moving them in the pet store. How about calling them bully sticks? Well, okay, that's good environmental stewardship, I guess. What are we going to do with the rest of this bull? I don't know. Dehydrate it and sell it for dogs? All right, that'll work. That's some kind of product for you there, ladies and gentlemen. I haven't noticed that one before. I don't have a dog. I've never owned a dog of my own. And to be honest, I've been in pet stores. I've had cats, and I never really do spend any time looking in the dog section. But I thought that would have caught my eye. But I guess not. And I guess that's probably because they've done a good job marketing it under the better name of bully sticks. It's a linked article here from the Huffington Post. Your dog is probably eating a lot of bull penises, and you don't even know it. If the marketers are doing their job, then yes. And Aaron Greenwood has this piece, wrote this piece back in March. We kind of hate to tell you this, but the bully sticks your dog is always chewing on? They're bull penises, which honestly, I don't even know why you would hate to tell us that. I feel bad for the bulls, but they aren't dead. And, at this point, it's just one or another kind of involuntary organ donation. At this point. Yes, those popular dog treats frequently sold loose in bins and pet stores, which is really the more disturbing of the images, across the country, consist of a male bovine's raw, dried private parts. It's not even cooked? Usually if it's got bully in the name, it has a penis as one of the ingredients. That's really interesting. What do we make of the bully pulpit now? David Goodnow, founder of the Natural Dog Company, it's natural, all right, told the Huffington Post this from Global Pet Expo in Orlando, the world's leading source of bull penises and other kinds, I guess. When used as ingredients in dog treats, animal byproducts like trachea, lung, and gullet, they've got to do something with these things, are candidly marked on Natural Dog Company's packaging. Okay. That's interesting. As they are on many competitors' products, but bully sticks are usually just called that, leading, as one 2013 Tufts University poll discovered, to confusion even among veterinarians about what a bully stick really is. Just 62% of vets correctly identified them as penises, compared to 44% of the general public. In other words, lots of people don't know that their dogs are eating a lot of bull penises. Experts say it's usually fine in terms of health. I wouldn't imagine there's anything particularly unhealthy about it besides, I guess it might affect your dog's mental state if he understood. I suppose it's possible, but, I don't know. It's meat, I guess, right? Oh, it's the raw dehydrated. I don't know. If dogs love the taste. You know something? I'm less impressed by bacon strips now. Dogs don't know it's bacon. Dogs don't know this is a bull penis, so I'm not really sure that that's really all that impressive. They don't know it's bacon. And frankly, dogs often don't appear to know that this is their own vomit or another dog's poop or whatever. So, I don't know. Suddenly, bacon strips not that impressive anymore. And how hard do they work to make it taste like bacon, too, right? And do we even know? It smells like bacon, I guess, to a human. I've never opened a package of them, but, tastes like bacon. Well, okay, that's fine. Maybe what we don't know is that bull penises also taste like bacon. And I bet you couldn't sell them, even if you tried to, even if you called them bacon sticks and said they were, all right. Well, I better get off this subject. No good can come from this. And even Bill now recognizes it too. I've just managed to get KGRX to shift the conversation from Trump to bull penises on KGRX in the morning. My work is done here, and I don't consider that to be much of a shift, to be honest. Donald Trump to bull penis, that's like, there's not even, 2 degrees of Kevin Bacon in there. But we did get bacon into all three aspects of the conversation. It's clearly time to move on, but these are the kind of tidbits that always make the show worthwhile to me, because otherwise, if I knew we were going to do this, I guess I'd probably still tune into the show. Here's another piece of the puzzle, though. We got to have more. Blue DuPage has sent me what purports to be, although I don't know, should I click through this? This feels like it's going to be malware attached to this. A recipe for penis stew. That really feels like I'm going to do my computer some damage with this one. But that's actually labeled up front, penis stew. And here is a, good to know, this was originally a Jewish recipe from Marcel Tomal. Apparently innards, including penis. Is that an innard? Once played a major role in Jewish cooking, so you are pissed or unhappy with that man in your life. What better way to make that statement than some penis stew? Here's a package, I guess at the butcher shop, of what, looks like ordinary, maybe sausage, but is instead some kind of penis. Not sure exactly what, but I'm not that good at identifying them. Ingredients for penis stew here, not surprisingly, penis. 1 pound of penis. Rams or bulls will do. 3 tablespoons of oil. Don't get that ratio wrong. 1 large chopped onion. Or 2 medium onions would also do, by the way. 2 garlic cloves, peeled and chopped. This whole thing is painful. 1 teaspoon of coriander seeds, crushed. God, they can't even leave the coriander seeds alone. 1 teaspoon of salt and freshly ground cracked black pepper. I'm sorry. Here we go. How to make it. Scald the penis and then unwrap the meat. Hey-o. Then drain and clean. Doesn't say how you clean one. Not sure a guy. All right, well, let's see. Place it in a saucepan, cover with cold water, bring to a boil, remove any scum, please do. Then simmer for 10 minutes, drain and slice. Heat the oil in a large skillet, add onion, garlic, and coriander, and fry until golden brown, the onion, that is. Add the penis slices, fry on both sides for a few minutes. Stir in the remaining ingredients, the good grinding of pepper. This isn't really so much of a stew. Where's the thickening agent? And that's important. Everybody wants to know where the penis thickening agents are in this calculation. All right, happy Friday. And you could probably do that with other cuts of beef or mutton if you want. It'll probably work out just as well. There's no reason you have to limit yourself to penis stew on that. Don't do it on my account. That's all I can say. All right, so let's see. Other stories that might, do better to get and keep an audience on a show like this. Let's see. You know what? Birthright citizenship. Since it was much in the news, I thought perhaps we could spend a little bit of time clearing things up on that front, especially starting with the whole anchor baby claim. I know it's a controversial term. I know it's insulting, but I don't know. Maybe you don't even really have to be insulted because, as it turns out, there's really basically no such thing. Yes, there's such a thing as birthright citizenship. That we're clear on. But all indications are, from my own reading and really, I think most people's experience, the idea of anchor babies, it's like terror babies. It doesn't really exist. You can, of course, come to the country pregnant or get pregnant shortly after coming to the country, deliver a baby here, and make a credible claim for citizenship, more than a credible claim, a rock-solid claim for citizenship for the child. The thing that gets people angry, and the idea that what we're supposed to be getting at when we wink, wink, and say things like anchor babies, is the idea that undocumented immigrants can come here, deliver a baby, the baby becomes an American citizen, and then you link your own claim to either put yourself on a path to citizenship or remain in the country somehow under some legal status because you are the parent of an American citizen. That doesn't exist. That doesn't really work. It is almost impossible to actually get any kind of change in your immigration status granted legally based on being the parent of a newborn American citizen. It just doesn't work that way. And, we've got some things set aside that we can read. We could, for instance, we'll walk you through it in a coherent fashion by reading this piece from Talking Points memo entitled An Immigration Lawyer on the Truth About Birthright Citizenship. Nonetheless, despite the fact that they're supposed to be explaining the truth about birthright citizenship, they have illustrated the article with a picture of Donald Trump. But that's to hook you in. David Leopold is the writer here. GOP frontrunner Donald Trump's immigration plan, released on Sunday, can be easily summarized in the candidate's own 4 words: they have to go. The plan is little more than a nativist wish list with a bold kicker: an end to so-called birthright citizenship, the constitutional rule that a child born in and under the jurisdiction of the U.S. is a citizen. The position's not new, as we discussed yesterday. Over the years, there have been attempts by restrictionists to challenge birthright citizenship. In the 1800s, in fact, the focus was Chinese immigrants. And by the way, the only people doing this in numbers appears to be Chinese folks now. But this time not poor Chinese immigrants, but rich Chinese, I don't know what you would call them, because they don't appear to be interested in immigrating to the United States necessarily, but they come to the United States for reasons unknown to me, the wealthier Chinese, and give birth to their children here, maybe because the hospital care is better. I have no idea. But the bonus is the kids are American citizens. But then they appear to return to China. And I'm not sure dual Chinese-American citizenship is a big bonus with the Chinese government there, although you wouldn't think people would be doing it in great numbers if the Chinese government wasn't tolerant of it, and they may have some kind of strange long-term plans for it. I don't know. So that fact remains there. The Chinese are hacking the 14th Amendment, but we don't seem to be focused on them. Donald Trump is focused on Mexicans, even when he's really talking about people from Central and South America, not actual Mexicans all the time. Anyway, in the late 1800s or the mid-1800s, there was a focus on blocking Chinese immigrants in any way they could, and then people focusing on their babies. Of late, the effort has been focused on Latino immigrants. led in Congress by Congressman Steve King, Republican of Iowa, of course, and more recently, Senator David Vitter, who believe, the two of them, they can end this constitutional provision with legislation. That's not likely to be true. Earlier this year, Vitter tried to attach an amendment to the Justice for Victims of Trafficking Act, which provided that a child born in the United States would be considered a citizen only if at least one parent is a citizen, is a lawful permanent resident, or has served in the military. They love to write that military exception in there because they feel like, and correctly so. By the way, there's a long, long history of succeeding with Republicans in that regard. It goes at least back to my own experience on the Hill in the early to mid 1990s, that you could always get Republicans to accept an amendment accepting non-citizens who had served in the United States military from whatever punitive measure they were putting forth. Still a big weak spot for them. So keep that in mind if you ever find yourself in Congress or working for a member of Congress and you're looking somehow to soften the blow of something and remind them that, yes, immigrants do, in pretty large numbers, serve in the military. Okay, let's see. Opposing birthright citizenship, the story continues, may emerge as a kind of litmus test for Republicans. Earlier this month, Governor Chris Christie said we should, quote, re-examine the 14th Amendment. But before that happens, let's get a few facts straight. By the way, it's interesting that he would go along with that one, considering how much grief he gave to Rand Paul in the first debate about, having to have real and pragmatic approaches to serious constitutional issues. Anyway, I mean, it's simple enough. I don't think anybody could say prevent you from re-examining an amendment, but I just, in terms of really repealing it or actually getting some kind of change passed, well, that would be a long shot. Anyway, Trump claims that birthright citizenship must end because, this is the key part, it's the, quote, biggest magnet for illegal immigration, unquote. That is, that it attracts illegal immigrants using their anchor babies to reap the benefits of U.S. citizenship. And here's the best part. In fact, being the undocumented parent of a U.S. citizen bestows no legal right to even be in the country, let alone a green card or citizenship. Just ask the thousands of undocumented parents deported and barred from the U.S. each day by the Department of Homeland Security. The law requires that to sponsor an undocumented parent for a green card, and that's what this is all about. The claim is, oh, well, now I'm related to a U.S. citizen, and that U.S. citizen can, at least technically, sponsor me as an immigrant. No, he or she can't. He or she is an infant. It doesn't work that way. How does it work? The law requires that to sponsor an undocumented parent, or anybody for that matter, for a green card, a child must first reach the age of 21. That is a long, long game you're playing if you're really thinking about anchoring yourself with a baby. But at that point, more than 2 decades after arrival, an undocumented parent who entered illegally is not eligible to apply for a green card in the U.S. After all, the parent must instead leave and apply from abroad. And once the parent departs the U.S., another part of the law bans his or her return for an additional 10 years. The magnet to which Trump refers is an arduous 31-year-long slog to legal status for the undocumented parent. 21 years for the child to be able to sponsor the parent, and then an additional 10 years of banishment from the U.S. because of their previously unlawful presence. Perhaps that's why Trump and others who oppose birthright citizenship have failed to produce any evidence of hordes of pregnant women streaming across the border illegally, or even legally, to give birth. There's no evidence that this is a widespread phenomenon. For instance, less than 2% of Arizona babies were born to non-resident mothers in 2010. But facts don't seem to matter to Trump, so it's worth asking, what would it take for the United States to end constitutional citizenship? It's really not worth asking that, because why would it be worth asking that if birthright citizenship doesn't actually have anything to do with immigration and isn't actually a magnet for immigrants of any kind. But I guess we'll entertain the question because, I don't know, the information is here and you might need it later on in some conversation with somebody. What would it take for the United States to end constitutional citizenship? There are those who believe birthright citizenship could be eviscerated by a mere statutory tweak. The theory is founded on the claim that the 14th Amendment was ratified to grant citizenship to recently freed slaves and not to every person born in the U.S. If the law is changed to hold that the children of undocumented immigrants are not within the, quote, jurisdiction of the U.S., as required by the 14th Amendment, then the children of undocumented immigrants may be deprived of citizenship at birth. Although, by the way, what you would do with hordes of people whom you suspect of heinous crimes being declared all at once not to be under the jurisdiction of the U.S., I do not know. I think that would make things more complicated. I think you want to be pretty clear about them being under our jurisdiction. So that's going to pose some problems there. But while the Supreme Court has not directly addressed the question of whether the children of undocumented immigrants are eligible for birthright citizenship, it's always just been assumed to be the case because the plain language says so, Trump's proposal would most likely require a constitutional amendment. That's because the 14th Amendment grants citizenship to, quote, all persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to its jurisdiction. That language, by the way, directly overruled the infamous Dred Scott decision and codified common law rules that people born within the jurisdiction of the U.S. are American citizens. The 14th Amendment forms the cornerstone of American civil rights by ensuring due process and equal protection to all persons, as against the state, I would add. What would America look like without constitutional citizenship? Ironically, the likely result would be to make America's broken immigration system even more shattered and at great humanitarian cost. According to the Migration Policy Institute, repeal of birthright citizenship would lead to a dramatic increase in the number of unauthorized children living in the U.S., as many as 24 million by the year 2050. The Immigration Policy Center argues that repealing birthright citizenship would create an underclass of unauthorized immigrants who, through no fault of their own, would be forced to live in the margins of U.S. society, would not have access to health care and basic services, would be vulnerable to exploitation and abuse, and would be at constant risk of deportation. When it all comes down to it, the citizenship clause of the 14th Amendment has very little to do with immigration. It is fundamentally focused on the preservation of civil rights. Trump's extremist proposal to end birthright citizenship, whether by elimination or reinterpretation of the citizenship clause, comes at the grave cost of abridging civil rights, even hearkening back to the days of Dred Scott when people were viewed as commodities to be bought and sold. Rather than challenge a constitutional provision that reversed a notorious Supreme Court decision, the effect of which was to dehumanize and deprive African Americans of U.S. citizenship, Trump would better serve the GOP and the nation by proposing serious immigration policy solutions. And if he wants to play the constitutional amendment game, you could certainly, rather than repeal the 14th Amendment, you certainly don't want to repeal the whole thing, but even rather than repealing the offending section of the 14th Amendment, you could just pass a new amendment that says there's no such thing as birthright citizenship, and to the extent that the 14th Amendment appears to bestow it on voluntary immigrants to the United States, that is no longer the case. Now, I don't know whether you could pass such a thing, but it would at least be better targeted, if that worries you. I do have some other pieces, and some I mentioned to you the other day that although the view that the 14th Amendment never was supposed to be about immigration was required constitutional conservatives, strict constructionists, to say that all of a sudden it was really the legislative intent that mattered and not the plain language of the Constitution, in this case the 14th Amendment, that made the big difference. Well, I am informed by another, I don't know, does Grace listen to the show? I know she follows on Twitter. Grace Lydia Suarez, who tweets as Grace Sells, Gracels. That is Grace LS, Lydia Suarez. Grace, get it? Okay, but you have to pronounce these things as one word. There's no other way to do it. So Grace LS would probably be a better way of saying it. Informs me that in her opinion, and it is a valuable opinion, and in my opinion, that the case is arguable on legislative intent grounds too. And she points here to the very interesting and intriguing testimony before the subcommittees on immigration and claims and also the subcommittee on the Constitution of the House Judiciary Committee back in December 13th, 1995, given by Walter Dellinger, then head of the OLC under the Clinton administration. He held the rank of Assistant Attorney General, which is, I think, the title of the person who heads up OLC. I think he was the head of the OLC at that point. I'm not even sure, but he's there speaking on behalf of OLC. And remember OLC and who that is. An extraordinarily powerful place to be coming from. They are counselors, the chief legal counselor, really, to the president when it comes to figuring out whether something they want to do is legal or constitutional. And we have usually a negative connotation because associated with the OLC, because we keep examining OLC memos that told President George W. Bush that he could do any horrible thing he wanted, depending on whether or not he had a reason that, to them, felt really cool. John Yoo is the guy that we usually associate with the awful, awful stuff coming out of OLC. But there were plenty of others, including Jay Bybee and a number of others, who also did awful things from the OLC. So here's the OLC doing something good. So how did President Bill Clinton's OLC view the idea of birthright citizenship and the 14th Amendment all tied up in one? There was, in fact, legislation pending at the time denying citizenship at birth to certain children born in the U.S. Guess what kind of children they were talking about. So let's see. We've got a bill. This is subtitles of his testimony here. A bill that would deny citizenship to children born in the United States to certain classes of alien parents is unconstitutional on its face, which is, of course, the exact opposite of what Donald Trump said. And Donald Trump, I don't think, has ever been the head of the OLC. But, usually those are pretty good lawyers. Not under the Bush administration, though, admittedly. So you could have a different look at this. A constitutional amendment to restrict birthright citizenship, although not technically unlawful, would flatly contradict the nation's constitutional history and constitutional traditions. That's a bigger deal, too. So what did he have to say for himself? Then there's a lot to it. And in fact, let's see. Let me scroll back and see if I can find. There was one excerpt that Grace sent to illustrate the point, but this is a very long bit of testimony. And let's see. She's excerpted things from a couple of parts of all this. Here's one from her yesterday. In fact, not even to me, but mentioning anchor babies don't exist. There is no protection for parents, so can we stop using that stupid phrase? And I think this is excerpted from here, too. The third common argument, I guess, as cited in this Walter Dellinger testimony, is that removal of the parent will deprive the U.S. citizen child of his or her constitutional rights. And I guess this is what people were trying to argue when they were trying to say, gosh, we should be able to use our babies as anchors. Well, the case law is, no, it doesn't really work that way. They throw you out anyway. In the matter of Anaya, citizens of Mexico with U.S. citizen children argued that deportation would cause constructive removal of their citizen children, thereby depriving the children of their constitutional rights. Similarly, in Acosta versus Gaffney, two undocumented aliens argued that deportation would cause undue economic hardship on their U.S. citizen daughter and deprive her of her right as an American citizen to reside in the United States. However, guess what happened? When people actually argued that stuff, both courts ignored these constitutional arguments, as the Acosta court did not even address the issue, and the Anaya court indicated that whatever rights the children had under the Constitution did not authorize the parents to be in the United States in violation of immigration laws. Despite the compelling argument of abuse of constitutional rights, de facto or constructive deportation of a U.S. citizen child has not been recognized as a basis to stay or prevent the deportation of the child's undocumented or otherwise ineligible parents. Harsh, but that's the state of the law. If you think there's such a thing, or such a thing as being able to stay in the United States despite the strictures of law just because you have a quote-unquote anchor baby, the courts say no. History says no. It's not true. It's never been true. So there you have it. And, if you're looking for a bigger and more in-depth look at the history and traditions of birthright citizenship and why we have it, because not all Western countries do. Lots of developed Western democracies do not grant citizenship by default to anyone born under their jurisdiction. Why do we choose to do so? Because I can see where reasonable people would say, why do we have this? I mean, it's clear that we do. And it's clear that it would be a constitutional problem. And I love the hell out of the Constitution. So it would make a constitutional problem if we were to try to simply deny it by statute. And, okay, if you amend the Constitution, why do I feel bad about that? And Walter Dellinger lays this out very clearly. Now, you can find it, and I'll link to it. I'll send you a link in today's post. But it's not hard to find. It's over at the Justice site, justice.gov. And there's a section on OLC opinions. And this was, of course, delivered on, this one was posted anyway, 12/31/1995. I think they just got the date wrong because I think this was actually delivered on December 13th. It should be 12/13/1995, but it's somehow filed under 12/31/1995. That would be a good night's work for New Year's Eve if he had really delivered it then. All right. I think, though, that I would love to read all the way through this, and maybe I'll read the opening paragraphs of it, but it's a 10-page testimony, so I don't think that's going to get done on today's show. But to give you a flavor, if you're thinking of clicking through or you want to be saved to click, this is what you're going to get out of there. Throughout this country's history, the fundamental legal principle governing citizenship has been that birth within the territorial limits of the United States confers United States citizenship. The Constitution itself rests on this principle of the common law. As Justice Noah Swain wrote in one of the first judicial decisions interpreting the Civil Rights Act of 1866, the words citizens under our Constitution and laws means free inhabitants born within the United States or naturalized under the laws of Congress. We find no warrant for the opinion that this great principle of the common law has ever been changed in the United States. When Justice Swain wrote these words, the nation was only beginning to recover from a great civil war sparked in no small part by the Supreme Court's tragically misguided decision in the Dred Scott case. That decision sought to modify the founders' rule of citizenship by denying American citizenship to a class of persons born within the United States. In response to Dred Scott and to the Civil War, Congress enacted the 1866 Act, and Congress and the states adopted the 14th Amendment in order to place the right of citizenship based on birth within the jurisdiction of the United States beyond question. Any restriction on that right contradicts both the 14th Amendment and the underlying principle that the amendment safeguards, which was that it was good enough for the founders and it ought to be good enough for you. Yes, the 14th Amendment wasn't framed until the 1860s, but it codified common law practice understood by all the framers and all who came since that being born in the United States and under the jurisdiction of the United States made you a citizen of the United States. They could easily have undone this, and remember, they were very preoccupied with naturalization status when they wrote the original Constitution, not the amendments to the Constitution, and not even the first 10 amendments to the Constitution. There's all sorts of discussion about how citizens and non-citizens ought to be regarded with respect to their eligibility for office, etc., all over the place. It was just a given because we knew what the basis of the population of this country was and how people got here. Similarly, it was well within contemplation that there would be people who arrived in this country in conditions other than slavery, and it wasn't some, magical thing 200 years hence that they could never have envisioned, and they had every opportunity to carve out others besides those who had been brought to the country under conditions of slavery and exclude them from birthright citizenship, and they chose not to. Continuing with the testimony, several bills and resolutions now before Congress that would deny citizenship to children born in the United States to certain classes of alien parents raise various issues of law and policy. My testimony today will address 2 points of constitutional law. First, because the rule of citizenship acquired by birth within the United States is the law of the Constitution, it cannot be changed through legislation, but only by amending the Constitution. Therefore, a bill such as H.R. 1363, here and then in the 104th Congress, the Citizenship Reform Act of 1995, we ought to look up who wrote that one, that purports to deny citizenship by birth to persons born within the jurisdiction of this country is unconstitutional on its face. Second, the proposed constitutional amendments on this topic conflict with basic constitutional principles. To adopt such an amendment would not be technically unlawful, but it would flatly contradict our constitutional history and constitutional traditions. Affirming the citizenship of African Americans that Dred Scott had denied, in 1862, President Lincoln's Attorney General wrote an opinion for the Secretary of the Treasury asserting, "As far as I know, you and I have no better title to the citizenship we enjoy than the accident of birth, the fact that we happened to be born in the United States. Today, in 1995, we cannot and should not try to solve the difficult problems of illegal immigration that illegal immigration poses by denying citizenships to persons whose claim to be recognized as Americans rests on the same constitutional footing as that of any natural-born citizen. Members of both your subcommittees have worked vigorously with the Department of Justice on an even-handed, bipartisan basis on legislation and oversight to address these problems." Simpler way of putting it, to harken back to Lincoln and Lincoln's own Attorney General, what is the basis? Why is Donald Trump a citizen of the United States, but the child of an undocumented immigrant not? Well, the answer is they're both currently citizens of the United States. Why should one not be? And the answer is difficult when you realize that, again, it's still just basically a historic accident that Donald Trump happens to have been born inside the United States, and so does this other kid. So was this other kid also born in the United States? Look at this. Now who's giving me a script problem? It's TPM. All right. Well, next time that bounces up, we'll close that. Okay, stop script. My goodness. And close TPM. Leave me alone. All right. Basically the only difference there is, because I'm sure that knuckle draggers and some others, some more intelligent people will say, well, the big difference is the parents are American citizens, and there ought to be more rights for American citizens than non-citizens. I guess that's the starting point of all this. But again, one, it was just an accident of birth for them too, and also, I mean, I guess you're talking about, this harkens back to a very weird, almost anti-American sort of thing. I guess, although I guess we've gotten used to the idea of inheritance in terms of, cash money and property passing from parents to children. But why should that be the case with something as intangible as United States citizenship? Is it only because United States citizenship also carries with it certain rights, privileges, and maybe access to publicly funded programs? It only happens for the child, of course, and it doesn't enable the parents to get a hold of any of those benefits, or at least it's not supposed to. So I'm not really even sure what the big deal is there. How many resources are the children consuming anyway? But it's the same accident of birth thing, and as if citizenship was something you could will to somebody. I mean, you couldn't do that, for instance. It just, and I guess it never had to because there wasn't the monetary value that attached to it. Now the idea of trying to see citizenship as a dollars and cents thing, I don't know. That sort of does. That violates constitutional tradition, certainly, and makes it, if it's worth dollars and cents, then it's severable. And if this is not a severable right, not an alienable right, then I guess there's really no way to put dollars and cents on it after all. It feels like it ought to be worth something, but no one knows the number. So that creates some rather enormous problems. But yeah, okay, so you were born here by accident and that person was born here by accident. I guess you could say, well, it wasn't an accident. They planned to do that so they could come here to the United States and give birth and make their children American citizens. All right. I mean, it's not like George Washington's forebears came here by accident either. They had a plan too. I don't know. But it's very interesting that to make this work requires lumping United States citizenship in with a pile of commodities like cash and property that can be passed on at common law by right of birth. And it's only the fact that they're worth money that requires protection for them in law. I mean, I guess by tradition, and I guess now by common law, we have come to recognize the right to pass money and property by virtue of birth, but that was an artificial construct. And the idea of citizenship, while also in a way an artificial construct, if you've got to construct it somehow, the most natural way, I think, is you're a citizen of the place you're born in. That's as bright line a rule as there can be. And it seems weird to want to undo that. It's so simple and straightforward. Conservatives ought to love it. Anyway, let me continue with the immigration, or with the testimony here, because I think, this is going to be the basis for some really good discussion going forward. H.R. 1363, remember that, the Citizens Reform Act of 1995, exemplifies the various legislative proposals before the committees. The stated purpose of the bill is to deny automatic citizenship at birth to children born in the United States to parents who are not citizens or permanent resident aliens. And why allow permanent resident aliens to bestow citizenship that doesn't belong to them as a commodity? How is it that you can pass on to your children something that you don't have? I don't know. They just thought it was somehow unfair to also include permanent resident aliens, but it's not. But that's not to say that Trump wouldn't be perfectly happy eliminating the class of permanent resident aliens from any legislation anyway. Section 3A of the bill amends Section 301A of the Immigration and Nationality Act, which grants U.S. citizenship at birth to all persons born in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof. Specifically, Section 3A proposes to define the phrase subject to the jurisdiction thereof to include only children born to U.S. citizens or permanent resident aliens, which I guess means that children born to illegal immigrants, or undocumented immigrants as we now call them, would be free to rape, pillage, and murder all they like because they wouldn't be subject to the jurisdiction of the United States. On the other hand, it may land you in Guantanamo, so maybe that's not such a great bargain. My office, Dellinger says, grapples with many difficult and close issues of constitutional law. The lawfulness of this bill is not among them. The legislation is unquestionably unconstitutional. The 14th Amendment declares that all persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and of the state wherein they reside. The unmistakable purpose of this provision was to constitutionalize the existing Anglo-American common law rule of jus soli, or citizenship by place of birth, and especially to extend it to persons of African descent and their descendants. Very true. And hey, as I recall, didn't everybody have to go back to their place of birth for the census in the story of the birth of Jesus? Isn't that why they're on their way back to Bethlehem? Anyway, Bible. Everyone loves it. The phrase, subject to the jurisdiction thereof, was meant to reflect the existing common law exception for discrete sets of persons who were deemed subject to a foreign sovereign and immune from U.S. laws, principally children born in the United States of foreign diplomats, with the single additional exception of children of members of Indian tribes. Apart from these extremely limited exceptions, in case you were wondering about that weird phrase of subject to the jurisdiction of, there can be no question that children born in the United States of aliens are subject to the full jurisdiction of the United States. If there was a question, you'd have some really serious problems. And as consistently recognized by courts and attorneys general for over a century, most notably by the Supreme Court in the United States versus Wong Kim Ark, there is no question that they possess constitutional citizenship under the 14th Amendment. When the Constitution recognized citizenship of the United States in prescribing the qualifications for president, senators, and representatives, it contained no definition of citizenship until the adoption of the 14th Amendment in 1868. Prior to that time, citizenship by birth was regulated by common law. And the common law conferred citizenship upon all persons born within the territory of the United States, whether children of citizens or aliens. The only common law exceptions to this generally applicable rule were children born under three circumstances: to foreign diplomats, on foreign ships, and to hostile occupying forces, which under the principles of international law were deemed not to be within the sovereignty of the territory. That's a pretty wacky exception there, too. As the legislative history of the Civil Rights Act of 1866 and the 14th Amendment makes clear, since we're now going to examine the legislative history and not simply the plain words, as the constitutional strict constructionists now insist, well, the definitions of citizenship contained in both were intended to codify the common law and overrule Dred Scott's denial of citizenship to persons of African descent. Thus, with the three limited exceptions already noted and the additional exception of tribal Indians, the 14th Amendment guaranteed citizenship to all persons born in the United States, including children born to aliens. The Civil Rights Act of 1866 provides that all persons born in the United States and not subject to any foreign power, excluding Indians not taxed, are hereby declared to be citizens of the United States. Very simple. During the debates on the act, the chair of the House Judiciary Committee stated that the provision defining citizenship is, quote, merely declaratory of what the law now is, unquote, and he cited, among other authorities, the quotation from William Rawle, whose constitutional law treatise was one of the most widely respected antebellum works. Quote, every person born within the United States, its territories, or districts, whether the parents are citizens or aliens, is a natural-born citizen in the sense of the Constitution and entitled to all the rights and privileges appertaining to that capacity, unquote. The 14th Amendment initially contained no definition of citizenship. Senator Howard of Michigan proposed to insert the definition that became the opening sentence of the 14th Amendment. He did so thusly: "This amendment which I have offered is simply declaratory of what I regard as the law of the land already, that every person born within the limits of the United States and subject to their jurisdiction is by virtue of natural law and national law a citizen of the United States." I thought they loved natural law. He explained that this was not meant to include those discrete classes of persons excluded by the common law, but will include every other class of persons. The framers intended the amendment to resolve not only the status of African Americans and their descendants, but members of other alien groups as well. This is reflected in the exchange between Senators Trumbull and Conness, supporters of the 14th Amendment and the Civil Rights Act, and Senator Cowan, a strong opponent of both. Senator Cowan expressed his reluctance to amend the Constitution in such a way as would, quote, tie the hands of the Pacific states so as to prevent them from later dealing with the Chinese as in their wisdom they see fit. The supporters of the Citizenship Clause responded by confirming their intent to constitutionalize the U.S. citizenship of children born in the United States to alien parents. Senator Cowan: "I am really desirous to have a legal definition of citizenship of the United States. What does it mean? Is the child of the Chinese immigrant in California a citizen? Is the child of a gypsy born in Pennsylvania a citizen?" Oh my. You know who hated gypsies. Senator Conness, I guess, is responding here: "The proposition before us relates to the children begotten of Chinese parents in California, and it is proposed to declare that they shall be citizens. We have declared that by law. Now it is proposed to incorporate the same provision in the fundamental instrument of the nation. I am in favor of doing so. The constitutional guarantee of citizenship to children born in the United States to alien parents has consistently been recognized by courts, including the Supreme Court and attorneys general, for over a century. Most notably, in United States v. again Wong Kim Ark, the Supreme Court held that a child born in San Francisco of Chinese parents who, under the Chinese exclusion laws then in effect, could never themselves become U.S. citizens, became at the time of his birth in the United States a citizen of the United States by virtue of the 14th Amendment. Well, that settles the question pretty obviously in terms of whether or not you need a constitutional amendment to deal with birthright citizenship. You absolutely do. You can't do it by mere statute, and the best evidence of it is that in the past, when the Supreme Court has very directly considered the question of what are we going to do with the children of immigrants who are barred by law from ever, under any circumstances, because it was so racist, becoming a United States citizen, or both of them barred from becoming United States citizens, that child was nonetheless an American citizen, period, and that was the intent both of the common law and the intent, the legislative intent, of the framers of the 14th Amendment. The court, in a detailed review of the Anglo-American common law of citizenship and the legislative history of the 14th Amendment, established several propositions. First, because the Constitution does not define United States citizenship, it must be interpreted in light of the common law. Under the common law of England, which was adopted by the United States, every child born within the territory of alien parents, was a natural-born subject, with the exception of children born of foreign ambassadors, of alien enemies during hostile occupation, and of aliens on a foreign vessel. Further, as appears upon the face of the 14th Amendment, as well as from the history of the times, the amendment was not intended to impose any new restrictions upon citizenship or to prevent any persons from becoming citizens by the fact of birth within the United States who would thereby have become citizens according to the law existing before its adoption. It is declaratory in form and enabling and extending in effect. That directly from Wong Kim Ark, as cited before. Specifically, the court explained The real object in qualifying the words all persons born in the United States by the addition and subject to the jurisdiction thereof would appear to have been to exclude by the fewest and fittest words, besides children of members of Indian tribes standing in a peculiar relation to the national government, unknown to the common law, two classes of cases: children born of alien enemies in hostile occupation and children of diplomatic representatives of a foreign state, both of which, by the law of England and our own law, had been recognized exceptions to the fundamental rule of citizenship by birth within the country. In concluding its review of the relevant law, the court summarized the 14th Amendment affirms the ancient and fundamental rule of citizenship by birth within the territory, in the allegiance and under the protection of the country, including all children here born of resident aliens, with the exception or qualifications, as old as the rule itself, of children of foreign sovereigns or their ministers, or born on foreign public ships, or of enemies within and during a hostile occupation of part of our territory, and with the single additional exception of children of members of the Indian tribes owing direct allegiance to their several tribes. The amendment, in clear words and manifest intent, includes the children born within the territory of the United States of all other persons of whatever race or color domiciled within the United States. Every citizen or subject of another country, while domiciled here, is within the allegiance and the protection and consequently subject to the jurisdiction of, guess, the United States. That's right. The court then turned to the status of Chinese persons in the United States under the Constitution and the Chinese Exclusion Acts, which provided for exclusion and expulsion of Chinese persons. After considering the effects of both sources of law, the court held that Wong Kim Ark had become a citizen at birth by virtue of the 14th Amendment, reaffirming the constitutional principle that the 14th Amendment, while it leaves the power where it was before in Congress to regulate naturalization, has conferred no authority upon Congress to restrict the effect of birth, declared by the Constitution to constitute a sufficient and complete right to citizenship. The principles set forth in Wong Kim Ark cannot be dismissed as having been overtaken by contemporary judicial interpretation or current events. Both the courts and the commentators have consistently cited and followed the principles of Wong Kim Ark. I am aware of only one statement of the contrary view that birthright citizenship may be modified by a simple act of legislation. In their 1985 book, Professors Peter Schuck and Rogers Smith argue for the novel reinterpretation of the Citizenship Clause. Briefly, the authors recommend replacing the ascriptive approach to citizenship, which determines citizenship by an objective circumstance, such as a place of birth or citizenship of parents, with a consensual approach, which makes political membership a product of mutual consent by the polity and the individual. Interesting. The authors argue that the 14th Amendment may be reinterpreted to allow Congress to deny citizenship to children of illegal aliens by legislation as opposed to constitutional amendment. As support, the authors attempt to show that the framers of the 14th Amendment intended the reference to subject to this jurisdiction of the United States to replace the existing ascriptive common law principle with one of express mutual consent. As one reviewer recommends, the author's proposals should be relegated to academic debate. Schuck and Smith are proposing a change in the law, not a plausible reinterpretation of the Constitution. Their theory would require repudiation of the language of the Constitution itself, the clear statements of the framers' intent, and the universal understanding of 19th and 20th century courts. That's all. Indeed, the authors themselves concede that there is no judicial precedent in support of their theory. Moreover, as one review of the book notes on a more philosophical level, the examples that Schuck and Smith give in support of their consent theory, the denial of citizenship to blacks, Indians, and Chinese, are all deeply shameful for contemporary Americans. This is not a history to build on. Well, it's not shameful for Donald Trump, so I guess he's exempt from that. In short, the text and legislative history of the Citizenship Clause, as well as consistent judicial interpretation, make clear that the amendment's purpose was to remove the right of citizenship by birth from transitory political pressures. The Supreme Court noted in Wong Kim Ark the same Congress, shortly afterwards, evidently thinking it unwise and perhaps unsafe to leave so important a declaration of rights to depend on ordinary acts of legislation, which might be repealed by any subsequent Congress, framed the 14th Amendment to the Constitution. More recently, the Supreme Court noted in Afroyim v. Rusk that the framers of the 14th Amendment wanted to put citizenship beyond the power of any governmental unit to destroy. See also Rogers versus Bellei, B-E-L-L-E-I, I guess, recognizing that Congress has no power express or implied to take away an American citizen's citizenship without his assent, where that citizenship is attained by birth. By excluding certain categories of native-born persons from U.S. citizenship, the proposed legislation impermissibly rescinds citizenship rights that are guaranteed to those persons by the Citizenship Clause of the 14th Amendment. Such a rescission of constitutionally protected rights is beyond Congress's authority. Where are my small government folks? Where are my libertarians in all this? I can't find you guys. I guess I'm going to go further into this testimony than originally thought, because we find ourselves now on page 9. How about that for in-depth reporting? Congress is, of course, constitutionally free to propose and the states to ratify any amendment to the Constitution. Such naked power undeniably exists. The Constitution taken as a whole, however, stands for certain enduring principles. When Congress undertakes to tamper through the amendment process with the most basic presuppositions of American constitutionalism, it should do so with exceeding caution and utmost restraint. Donald Trump to a T, right? The proposition that all persons born in the United States and subject to its jurisdiction are citizens at birth is one of those bedrock principles. Academics may conceive of nation-states in which citizenship would not necessarily extend to those who lack the approval or mutual consent of existing citizens. There are such countries, after all. But the country in question is not some theoretical conception, but our own country, with its real experience and its real history. It would be a grave mistake to alter the opening sentence of the 14th Amendment without sober reflection on how it came to be a part of our basic constitutional charter. The constitutional principle with which these proposed amendments would tamper flows from some of the deepest well springs of American history, which we hate, obviously. From the earliest days of our nation, with the tragic exception of slaves and tribal Indians, all those who were born on its soil and subject to no foreign power became its citizens. The simple fact of birth here in America was what mattered. And then came Dred Scott. In its most monumentally erroneous decision, which Donald Trump seeks to reinstate, the Supreme Court created a monstrous exception to the common law rule that birth on American soil to a free person was sufficient for American citizenship. The court held that no persons of African descent, including free persons of African descent, and none of their descendants for all time to come, could ever be citizens of the United States regardless of their birth in America. It was in the aftermath of this decision that one of our great political parties was formed, and it's not so great anymore, I guess. In 1857, in the first of many speeches he was to give on the subject, that party's candidate for president in 1860 denounced Dred Scott's creation of a class of persons born on American soil and yet without rights, and condemned to pass their status on to future generations. That status you can pass on. You can, by virtue of race, according to Dred Scott and I guess Donald Trump, pass on the right, I guess, this negative right. You can pass property to your kids, you can pass money to your kids, but you can never cleanse them of the sin of your undocumented status, ever. And they will remain undocumented perpetually in all the future years, and their children and their children and their children. That's all it takes. If you came to the country without documentation, you work a blood crime against your line, which is also a problem constitutionally, by the way, if you look a little further back. So where were we? Abraham Lincoln declared that the defenders of that decision had committed themselves to a principle that contradicted and that made a mere wreck, mangled ruin of the Declaration of Independence. Afterwards, the nation plunged into the heart of darkness. A savage and brutal civil war in which hundreds of thousands lost their lives on the battlefield. From those ashes, a nation was reformed. It is no trivial matter that the 14th Amendment opens with the principle that some would now change. From our experience with Dred Scott, we had learned that our country should never again trust to judges or politicians the power to deprive from a class born on our soil the right of citizenship. But screw it, let's do it anyway. We believe that no discretion should be exercised by public officials on this question. There should be no inquiry into whether or not one came from the right caste or race or lineage or bloodline in establishing American citizenship. Other nations may seek more consensual and perhaps more changeable forms of citizenship. For us, for our nation, the simple, objective, bright-line fact of birth on American soil is fundamental. Since the Civil War, America has thrived as a republic of free and equal citizens, more or less. This would no longer be true if we were to amend our Constitution in a way that would create a permanent caste of aliens, generation after generation after generation, born in America but never to be among its citizens. Is there a more exploitable class? I can't think of one. To have citizenship in one's own right by birth upon this soil is fundamental to our liberty as we understand it. In America, a country that rejected monarchy, each person is born equal, with no curse of infirmity and with no exalted status arising from the circumstance of his or her parentage. All who have the fortune to be born in this land inherit the right, save by their own renunciation of it, to its freedoms and protections. Congress has the power to propose an amendment changing these basic principles, but it should hesitate long before so fundamentally altering our republic. Who has the big problem with this? The guy born here in America to super wealthy parents who managed to turn super wealth into ultra super wealth. What a genius. And, a bunch of Republicans actually believe this is real and worthwhile. Very sad. Sad commentary indeed, to say the very least about this. All right, so let's see if the computer will let us switch over. Now, you know what? It's never allowed me to simply close TPM. I'm stuck with it forever, and I'm going to have to switch over to the iPad in order to read anything else from Pocket. So thanks a lot. From, I guess, today, we have TPM on the list of suspect sites that I have to be careful about opening. I really have to find a fix for this. And maybe the fix ultimately is just switch over to Chrome. I don't know. What a tragedy that would be. All right, so let's see. We can't get it to stop. We'll look over in Pocket. There's a lot of interesting things that, you know what I should be picking up on is there was a line of stories that we began a couple of days or weeks ago about surveillance that needs some updating. But before I go and do that, I guess I'll throw this little tidbit in from the Huffington Post from the other day. It won't make much of a difference because Ted Cruz is a big hypocrite and doesn't mind being a big hypocrite. But I should note, for the record, thanks to Huffington Post's digging here, that Ted Cruz once said, on the record, he's a very facile debater, I guess, that an effort to end birthright citizenship would be a huge mistake. And he's much younger looking here, but here's the story. Ted Cruz said on Wednesday, currently, that he absolutely, and that's a great word for it, right? Absolutely supports ending automatic citizenship for children born on American soil as guaranteed by the 14th Amendment. We should end granting automatic birthright citizenship to the children of those who are here illegally, Cruz said in an interview on Michael Medved's radio show. That has been my position from the very first day of my running for the Senate. But the Texas conservative actually felt differently about the matter while running for Senate. How strange. In a 2011 interview on the Duke Machado show, Duke Machado, is that a real name? Come on. Cruz called the efforts to change birthright citizenship misguided because they stood on shoddy legal footing, which Walter Dellinger just told you at great length. I've looked at the legal arguments against it, and I will tell you as a Supreme Court litigator, Those are some big-time creds, right? Those arguments are not very good, he said. As much as someone may dislike the policy of birthright citizenship, it's in the U.S. Constitution, and I don't like it when federal judges set aside the Constitution because their policy preferences are different. Instead, Cruz argued that the attention should be on securing the U.S.-Mexico border. Now, he'll claim that this is not necessarily hypocrisy because what he'll say is, well, I don't think judges should set aside the Constitution and rule differently because they have a policy difference with current law and the strictures of the Constitution. But I do think you could go and amend the Constitution so that judges could express their policy preferences without conflict with the Constitution. That's true. But why would it be a mistake for conservatives to do this? He says he thinks it's a mistake to be focusing on trying to fight what the Constitution says on birthright citizenship, and he thinks, quote, we are far better off focusing on securing the border because birthright citizenship wouldn't be an issue if we didn't have people coming in illegally. Ah, well, that's something. The issue resurfaced, of course, most recently in the 2016 race because Donald Trump. And let's see, Scott Walker endorsed it a couple days later. Rand Paul endorsed it. Governor Christie followed suit. And we know Jindal has done so as well, even though he was arguably an anchor baby himself. So, interesting collection of folks having jumped on the bandwagon here. Let's see. I wanted to scroll back a little bit and find the other issues of surveillance. I know we brought this up a couple of days ago, and I read a little bit, I think, from Sean King, who's had his own ups and downs in the last couple of days, by the way. I haven't paid much attention to that one because, as I understand the objections to his background, they make no difference to me. I have learned a great deal from Sean King on all sorts of issues, not the least of which, of course, coming to understand the Black Lives Matter movement, and I couldn't really tell you what difference it would make if he was any color you chose to pick. The guy described the movement to me in a way that made sense, and that's that. But I understand, of course, from a personal perspective, why he felt like he had to defend himself. It's a tragedy that he did, but hey, I'm convinced, and I was convinced that I didn't even need to be convinced of anything from the very beginning. Okay, well, let's see if I can get Pocket to open up this piece. I mentioned that I had read something from Sean on this note, but I have another piece here from First Look and The Intercept. On undercover police have regularly spied on Black Lives Matter activists in New York. I think we all guessed that this was probably true, but this will document some of the more annoying bits of it. Documents obtained by The Intercept confirm that undercover police officers attended numerous Black Lives Matter protests in New York City between December 2014 and February 2015, much like they did, I guess, with Occupy as well. The documents also show that police in New York have monitored activists, tracking their movements and keeping individual photos of them on file. The nearly 300 documents released by the Metropolitan Transit Authority and the Metro North Railroad, interesting, reveal more on-the-ground surveillance of Black Lives Matter activists than previous reports have shown, conducted by a coalition of MTA counterterrorism agents, seems like a waste of their time, and undercover police in conjunction with the NYPD intelligence officers. Par for the course, of course, but, why spend any of those resources on trying to figure out how to not spark these problems in the first place, right? This appears to be the first documented proof of the frequent presence of undercover police at Black Lives Matter protests in the city of New York, though many activists have suspected their presence since mass protests erupted there last year over a grand jury's decision not to indict Daniel Pantaleo, the officer involved in the death of Eric Garner. The protest surveillance and use of undercover officers raises questions over whether New York area law enforcement agencies are potentially criminalizing the exercise of free speech and treating activists like terrorist threats. Critics say the police files seem to document a response vastly disproportionate to the level of law breaking, even if there is any, associated with the protests. Very interesting and goes into great detail about what they have been doing, but that's not the only facet of the surveillance state, essentially, as you know, that I like to keep an eye on. And I was hinting at it the other day when I read you the story about Google and its humanoid robot that was, as I said, stumbling around in the woods. But there was a more important story that I wanted to share, and it came from, of course, I can't look at the original because Pocket doesn't really want to cooperate that much, but from aeon.co, not .com, but Aeon is not something I typically get a chance to look at an awful lot, but this was an interesting bit called the Digital Star Chamber by Frank Pasquale. I was sort of interested in this, and this took a really different approach to the whole thing here, but I want to at least put this one on your radar. In a recent podcast series called InstaSurfs, a former Uber driver, this is going to tie together a lot of our common threads, named Mansour, gave a chilling description of the new computer-mediated workplace. First, the company tried to persuade him to take a predatory loan to buy a new car. Apparently, a number cruncher deemed him a high risk of defaulting. Second, Uber would never respond in person to him. It just sent text messages and emails. This style of supervision was a series of take-it-or-leave-it ultimatums, a digital boss coded in advance. This is a very different discussion, of course. It's not surveillance per se as much as it is an interest in the ability of cheap surveillance and cheap data storage and cheap number crunching power to make very important decisions in all of our lives. And it comes at many different levels. Everything from everyday decisions about whether or not to continue someone's employment, or whether or not to offer them loans under favorable conditions, or if you are patrolling the desert looking for illegal immigrants, let's say, via drone, as Ben Carson suggests we ought to do, the decision of whether or not this is a risk worth firing upon. I just thought this brings in a number of different aspects of my overarching concern with turning it all over to our robot overlords. Interesting. Anyway, then the company suddenly took a larger cut of revenues from him and other drivers. And finally, what seemed most outrageous to Mansour, his job could be terminated without notice if a few passengers gave him 1-star reviews, since that could drag his average below a 4.7. According to him, Uber has no real appeal recourse or other due process in play for a rating system that can instantly put a driver out of work. It simply crunches the numbers. But don't look at us. We're just a marketplace. Mansour's story compresses long-standing trends in credit and employment, and it's by no means unique. Online retailers live in fear of a Google death penalty, a sudden mysterious drop in search engine rankings if they do something judged fraudulent by Google's spam detection algorithms. Job applicants at Walmart in the U.S. and other large companies take mysterious personality tests, which process their responses in undisclosed ways, and white-collar workers face CV sorting software that may understate or entirely ignore their qualifications. One algorithmic CV analyzer found all 29,000 people who applied for a reasonably standard engineering position unqualified. The infancy of the internet is over. As online spaces mature, Facebook, Google, Apple, Amazon, and other powerful corporations are setting the rules that govern competition among journalists, writers, coders, and e-commerce firms. A very disparate group, don't you think? Why would you tie them all together? Well, this article will tell you. Uber and Postmates and other platforms are adding a code layer to occupations like driving and service work. Cyberspace is no longer an escape from the real world. It is now a force governing it via algorithms, recipe-like sets of instructions to solve problems. From Google search to OkCupid matchmaking, software orders and weights hundreds of variables into clean, simple interfaces, taking us from query to solution. Complex mathematics governs such answers, but it is hidden from plain view, thanks either to secrecy imposed by law or to complexity outsiders cannot unravel. Algorithms are increasingly important because businesses rarely thought of as high-tech have learned the lessons of the internet giants' successes. Following the advice of Jeff Jarvis, and Jeff Jarvis is What Would Google Do? They are collecting data from both workers and customers consensually, because you can't use their services or get paid without them, of course, and using algorithmic tools to make decisions, to sort the desirable from the disposable. Companies may be parsing your voice and credit card record when you call them to determine whether you match up to ideal customer status or are simply a waste who can be treated with disdain. Interesting. How about that? I hadn't even thought about that one. Epagogix. That's a company. Epagogix advises movie studios on what scripts to buy based on how closely they match past successful scripts. Even winemakers make algorithmic judgments based on statistical analyses of the weather and other characteristics of good and bad vintage years. In other words, Google and cheap access to unlimited data storage and analysis capacity, not to mention more opportunities than ever to gather data either under coercion or in some cases entirely voluntarily, I suppose, is moneyballing every single aspect of our lives, more so than ever thought previously. And I found this article, as weird and out of left field as it seems in the opening paragraphs, I think in the limited time we've been able to give to it, you have gotten a sense, I hope, of just how pervasive this really is and in how many aspects of your life this sort of thing can be interfering. And doing so under the auspices of, under the guise of being, we're just crunching the numbers here and we're going where the data tells us to go. And besides which, it's a totally dispassionate analysis of the factors that go into what would otherwise be intangibles or inchoate decision making. And just the old business decision rule, we just felt like this was a better idea for a business model. And there's very little right now that stands in the way of executing decisions that way, especially by private entities. But also consider how much more integration there is now by private entities, and particularly by these data gathering outfits and data analysis and storage outfits with governmental operations. It now can easily be passed on to the government and acted on by the government. These algorithms can sort everything from your creditworthiness to your trustworthiness when it comes to, allowing you into the country, allowing you to fly, giving you a passport. Who knows what else? For that matter, consider the risk factors that they could attach to you and let police agencies know about whether or not they are wasting their time surveilling you. You would think that the data would say otherwise, but then again, it's a black box. You don't know how it's programmed. And someone somewhere is making the decision about whether or not your activities and your First Amendment rights need to be monitored more closely. Very interesting, something to think about for the weekend. Maybe something we'll discuss further.
From Daily Kos Radio on networksradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waldman.
Stay tuned, though, for the after show, which will take on all sorts of fantastic and equally scary ideas. Oh, look at this one. Peru, after a 14-year hiatus, will begin shooting down planes suspected of trafficking cocaine. Bad news. But the good news, Arliss Bunny and Will McLeod today. Stay tuned. I'll talk to you next week.